Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello and welcome to the Polygamer podcast, episode number 96 for Wednesday, December 11th, 2019. I'm your host, Ken Gagney. I am a huge fan of published material, hard copy, print editions that you can hold in your hand, whether it's books from the libraries or magazines like Game Informer, or my own magazine, which I publish quarterly, Juice to GS, all about old Apple computers. And so I have a kindred spirit on the show today, the founder and creative director of the video game magazine, A Profound Waste of Time, Caspian Whistler. Hello, Cass.
Hey, dude. It's nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you're very busy putting together the next issue of the magazine, running the Kickstarter to fund it, doing your day job, and everything else. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I mean, I don't know if it's that impressive, but yeah, I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
So I've backed both of your Kickstarters, so I'm familiar with APWOT. But for those of our listeners who may be new to it, how would you describe this production of yours?
A Profound Waste of Time, or like I tend to abbreviate it as like APWOT, which it's like an independent magazine that I started as a student initially, when I was studying graphic design at uni. And it's basically evolved since then to become this big, long form kind of anthology of like long form writing about video games. The emphasis really isn't on news and reviews or keeping people up to date as much as it is about like talking about how games make people think and feel on like an emotional level or like on a human level. So the idea is to create like printed content that's timeless. And there's also a big emphasis on illustration. So it's a big illustrated art book. We don't tend to have game screenshots in the mag. So yeah, a big, long art book about games written by people in the games industry, if that makes sense.
I have so many questions about the content and the illustration, but I want to dig a little bit into the background of it. I understand that APWOT was inspired by zines. What are zines?
So yeah, so like I touched on, so as a graphic design student, we were introduced to the concept of zines, which are basically a zine is it's just a magazine with the MAGA chopped off. It's this abbreviated term that's used to refer to something that is written literature that is like self-published. So the idea of people were making their own magazines during like the punk era in the UK when photocopying was becoming a big thing that was, becoming cheaply accessible. Printing was becoming really cheaply accessible. People were making their own, little publications basically. And these were called zines. And, there's a huge thriving zine culture that's still active today of just people getting together and making things, collaborating and doing it on basically no budget. That's how A Profound Waste of Time started. It was like a very small, independent little thing that I made initially completely on my own. I used to do all the writing and art solo. And now I get to work with all these amazing people and actually commission illustrators and writers to do the content, thanks to Kickstarter.
It sounds like you've evolved a lot from your zine roots. This is still self-published literature, but it's voluminous, it's colorful. Do you consider it a zine or a magazine?
Now it's like a magazine. I mean, really, in terms of build quality, it's actually much closer to a book, really. I think it's still very much a magazine because that's, contextually game magazines are sort of dying out. And the whole idea was to sort of resuscitate that in a new way. But so yeah, I don't know. I'm less worried about defining it as much as I am about just making the thing, if that makes sense.
No, it certainly does. I am also curious, though, about your choice of format. So this is a print publication. And as you said, print is sort of dying out. Just in this past year, we saw Game Informer had significant layoffs. About 3 years ago, Kill Screen went out of print. So what is the role or value of print in such a fast-moving industry?
I think that's exactly the point, right? You just said it, fast-moving. I often think that the game scene is actually too fast-moving for its own good sometimes. I think there's something about physical media that completely changes the way in which we kind of like you digest and read something. Like reading an article on your computer screen or on your phone is a very, very different experience to reading it in like physical form. The state of mind, I'd say, is a bit different. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not quite as instantaneous a process. I describe it as similar to the difference between listening to music on Spotify or setting up your vinyl record player if you're lucky enough to have one and playing it. It's a different kind of way of enjoying more or less the same content, but the medium being different kind of changes the way that you digest stuff. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, you've talked a little bit about how format dictates the content, and the fact that it is in print lends itself to not necessarily news and reviews, but more in-depth content. Is that right?
Basically, yeah. I mean, I think like a huge, like the magazine, the original impetus for it, because I started it around 2014, and I don't know if you remember a lot of games discourse around that time, but it was pretty depressing. Do you know what I mean? Like it was a really bad time to be interested in games, and I think a lot of that, like the sort of culture that we've been sort of privy to, is kind of been generated by this this reactionary kind of state of mind. And we're seeing that, that's coming from the platforms that we're using, from these online platforms that kind of incentivize quick reactions, anything that's like on the far end of a spectrum, to be considered extreme gets clicks, and that creates, revenue. So we kind of live on this like attention economy at the moment. And that obviously changes the way content has to exist and be served, right? So when you make something as a physical publication, you get to remove yourself from all of that, and you get to create like what I would say, quieter content, more reflective content. A huge part of what I wanted to talk about was, games, how games affect people, emotionally and, spiritually, and, how it makes them think and feel. And all of that is, it just lends itself much better to a quiet little zine, as opposed to, I'm not sure if a lot of the content that we publish in the magazine would be self-sustaining in if A Profound Waste of Time was a website. I just don't think it would be feasible.
Is that to say that your magazine's content is not available online? It's not a PDF anywhere?
No. Like it's very decisively meant to be, a physical object that you spend time with. That's definitely the case for now. I mean, it's funny, if you type in A Profound Waste of Time onto Google, like the very first thing that comes up is A Profound Waste of Time PDF. Like that's the auto-suggested Google search term that comes up. So clearly there is demand for, there to be an online version. But I the reason it's called A Profound Waste of Time isn't just meant to be a clever comment about video games, but it's also meant to be a comment on like, what's the point of creating a physical games magazine in this day and age when you've got the internet and all this accessibility, all this instantaneous information? I think the fact that the magazine is like not, internet based in any shape or form, like is a really big part of its identity.
So you feel that having the content both in print and online, instead of complementing each other, they might actually compete with each other?
I don't know if I'd go that strongly. I think, but I think for me, like this whole project has been about creating like a beautiful object. The nice thing about books is that they have like the potential to like bridge interests. You don't really need to be a quote unquote gamer to enjoy A Profound Waste of Time. You just need to enjoy nice writing and pretty pictures. You know what I mean? So there's no need really to, when it's a physical object, someone can stumble across it. They can just enjoy being with the object. When it's just something that is online, you have to sort of know what you're looking for to be able to find it in the first place, ironically. Do you know what I mean? Like the internet's so massive, you kind of have to immediately know what your interests are. There's something so nice about being able to bring this thing and show it to another person. the title, A Profound Waste of Time, is something that, people always used to tell me about video games growing up, that like these were just like irrelevant and you shouldn't be doing them, and it creates absolutely no positive impact on your life and it's not growing you as a person at all. And what's so nice and what I wanted to do with the zine was just to create my own little curated like example of like what games are for me and how they make me feel, and the stuff, the art that they make me want to create, and the writing that they make me want to write.
You sort of tongue-in-cheek describe video games as a profound waste of time. Are there any particular games that you fell in love with that inspired you to create an entire magazine about them?
I mean, I'd be lying if I didn't say that, like, growing up in the UK, most gaming discussion kind of boiled down to sort of Call of Duty or FIFA or GTA. You know what I mean? Like that was the most you'd really get to talk to people about games about. Those were the subjects that people would sort of gravitate to. I always got really frustrated because I always felt that like there's so much more to games as a medium than those three titles, and that's not a comment on, those games in particular or, anything, or anything about like the way they're made or anything, because they're all, powerhouses for a reason. But, I just like, I think there's something problematic, right? When people think of video games and they just think of those three things. And that was a consistent thing that sort of, happened a lot with my conversations about games. And I often found that when people were being dismissive about the medium, it's because they didn't really know that games could be more than that, or that there were different kinds of games. A really good example is that, when you think about so many people call themselves gamers, right? Or video game players or games enthusiasts or whatever term that you want to call them. But they, they tend to play just like the biggest AAA releases, right? And then that becomes the stuff that is known to most people. But I wouldn't call someone who just went to see Marvel superhero films and exclusively Marvel superhero films a film buff. Do you know what I mean? And I don't think that they would claim to either. With all that in mind, I was sort of creating this publication to be like, oh, well, like here are the games that I like. And then maybe if I like create this and package it in a way that is nice enough that people would be curious to look into, I can sort of demonstrate video games as sort of, as like a broader artistic medium, I guess, which I guess sounds quite lofty and self-important now that I'm saying it out loud. But that was the aim, it came from I think zines often come from a place of frustration. The punk movement started from a place of frustration and they started the zine movement. So I think it's only natural that my zine would eventually come from the same place.
No, that sounds brilliant. And I think you need to have ambitious goals if you want to make any sort of a difference. And let's talk about some of the amazing content you got to help you achieve that goal. In your first issue, for example, you had Jake Kaufman, Ashley Birch, Susan Arndt, Jonathan Holmes. How was it that this being your first Kickstarter, your first issue of your magazine, you were able to attract such an all-star editorial lineup?
Well, the honest truth is, I don't know. I mean, something happened. I don't know. I think it kind of goes back to that frustration feeling, that I was talking about earlier. I think that, at the time when I started this thing, like games discourse was so caustic and so horrible, and, I was thinking like, if I'm going to create a zine about like, and if the zine is going to come from a place of rebellion, how do you rebel against that? Like so many of the voices in zines are already angry voices, but when the games industry is already so angry, where there are a million YouTube channels where someone's got the title angry video game person or some kind of variation of that as their channel name, it does make you, wonder. So I decided that the way I would rebel is by doing the opposite, which is by creating a space that is really calm and really welcoming and really pretty and really like just, nice and inviting and, expansive and welcoming. I don't know. And I think that kind of struck a chord with people that I was writing to. I think, a lot of the people, when I was asking them to take part, I'd already been making the zine a couple issues before. So I had something physical to show, which really helped. So, it wasn't just like, hey, I've got this business idea. Do you want to, take part in this zine that may or may not exist? Like I had something physical to show, and that really helped. And I think maybe I was tapping into something that a lot of people were feeling similarly to and made them want to take part. That's the best I can guess at the moment as to how I got people. And once you get people to take part, like other people are willing to take part, it kind of snowballs in that sense. So the real answer is I'm just incredibly lucky.
Whenever people ask me what they need before they go on Kickstarter, I tell them they need either a prototype and or a reputation. And you had that by having published this magazine before. You were able to attract some great writers, but also not just writers, also actual game developers writing about their own games. Did you find working with them to be a different experience from working with traditional journalists or members of the games press to actually work with programmers, designers, coders, writing about their own games?
Oh yeah, I mean it's super difficult. Like it's like herding cats, and that's not because like any of the people are bad at what they do, not at all. But when a game dev says that they'll write, it's amazing. But they're also a game dev, which means that they're working really hard making a video game. So that means that when it comes time to to actually find the time to write for the magazine, it's a complete gear shift. And honestly, it's a miracle that we were able to get any of the people to take part that we do at all. And the fact that we're able to not only, get them to take part, but also to get them to finish and write a piece, it's amazing. Like, writers tend to be better, I want to say, at sticking to deadlines and stuff. But a big part of why the magazine is able to exist at all is because because there's no advertising, because it's self-funded, there is no deadline. So I'm happy to wait for the right piece to get finished. I don't know. I think if we were doing a hard deadline, we wouldn't have got those game devs to take part. Do you know what I mean? Like it would have been too hard. So having like the freedom to just let's release, to say to ourselves, let's release something when it's ready. I think that's the only reason we're able to work with game developers and writers and voice actors at all. Do you know what I mean?
It's similar to what Shigeru Miyamoto once said, to paraphrase him. A delayed magazine is eventually good, but a bad magazine is bad forever.
He did say that. 100%. Good old Shigsy. I actually don't know if that original quote is correctly, isn't there a lot of debate about as to whether or not he actually said that? That might not be attributed to him. Either way, it's a good quote, but
I hadn't considered the fact that since you don't have a deadline, you can wait for content. I can also see how that might trickle down to your writers where they say, oh, well, Cass doesn't have a deadline, so neither should I. And then why not take their time?
The first magazine was meant to take 6 months to make. It ended up taking 1.5 years to make. God knows how long issue 2 is going to take. I don't think it's as simple as that. With the Kickstarter, we got funded twice over the first time. And my end result was that I just put all of that money into the magazine, which made it take twice as long to make and, twice as much content. It's understandable. And then, so much life happens, things happen outside of people's control. So yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I do need to look going forward as to sort of how I can keep the magazine on sort of like a regular, on like a semi-regular release schedule. But I think the main thing is just learning to walk before we can run. Do you know what I mean? And I think if we can just get some good publications out, then that's the main thing for me. I'm happy to chip away on them in the background if they take a long time. And I think our readers are happy to wait as well, thankfully, for the same reason, because they want it to be good too.
What about choosing the games? How do you choose, is this primarily modern indie games you cover? Or if somebody wanted to write about a mainstream game like FIFA or a 30 or 40-year-old game like the original Mario Brothers, is that something you'd be open to, or is that not really your focus?
Yeah. No, I mean, for me, it's just about does the writer genuinely care about what they're writing about? We're not interested in news and reviews because, I don't think there's any point in having any of that in a magazine that's going to be out of date the moment it's printed. Do you know what I mean? Like, who's going to read it? Like, there's, for that reason, like, no one is. The key thing is that people can talk about whatever they want. As long as it's something that they, as a game or topic that like they genuinely care about and that's important to them, or that they have something interesting to say, so for that reason, you can talk about a game that released today, a game that's not out yet, or a game from 40 years ago. I think my main point is that, like, as long as it's always just a great place for jumping off into a discussion or into, exploring something. Because, while the magazine is a games magazine, often it's about everything else but games. Games are often like the impetus for like all this other creative output that these people are making. So I'd say that's the core. Yeah.
Yeah. Video games are very much a narrative medium these days, and we connect with their stories through our own stories, sort of like Ashley Birch in the first issue. It's just a leaping off point for all these other things that are happening in our lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's a classic example. Like, that was actually like the first article that we'd gotten submitted when I was doing issue 1. I just remember thinking like, oh my God, like the content of this magazine can be really, really important and special, if people, when people are like willing to put themselves out there like that. Yeah, it's all about just communicating, hopefully, through the content, that games are inspiring, but they inspire people to do things and to make things and to think things. That's why this title is A Profound Waste of Time, and the subtitle is inspired by video games. Because I think we always talk about games in terms of how much money they make, or how big they are, or, we always talk about them in certain lights, but we never talk about them as like inspiring pieces of art.
Speaking of art, this magazine is very important, not only in terms of its editorial content, but also its layout. And I can't help but think about how different that is from the design of the magazine I publish. I am the sole editor and publisher, although I have a staff of writers, for this magazine that comes out 4 times a year. And I have the same templates I've been using for 25 years, text boxes that I just drag and drop stuff into. Your magazine, every page is a unique work of art. How much effort must that take, and how do you tie it all together?
Oh, I don't know. It's a lot of crying. A lot of pulling my hair out and just freaking out for months on end. I mean, the honest answer, snarky, joking comments aside, I guess, is that like, it's just about, the fact that we have the time to do it, Like, I think that's the main thing. I mean, I imagine the reason why you have a template that you've been using is because you have a deadline and you have to get that out by a certain amount of time. Because we are lucky enough to get crowdfunded, it just gives us the breathing space to create something that we can obsess about the minutiae of, in terms of layout and templates and stuff. I remember when I was doing this, I really freaked out because, this was my first big project out of uni. I just graduated, and then the Kickstarter happened, and I was just like, what am I just felt completely out of my depth for a bit of it. So I worked with an actual graphic designer to help me build the kind of grid-like template. It's not the same as a template, but more of just like a grid, a baseline to work from. From there, I can, build onto and customize and change and, do all of that. But yeah, I worked with a designer, Leo Field, to help me build the very basic skeleton structure of the pages. But that only helps so much. Every page still takes like a huge amount of consideration and time. And, then there's typesetting the whole thing, making sure that all the paragraphs are just perfectly placed. Yeah. It's just a case of, trying my hardest to just make every page visually interesting. I don't want anything, if we're cutting it down a tree to make something, I don't want there to be a single page where you think, this was expendable. Like, it has to justify its existence as a physical book. Otherwise, what's the point,
Wow, that is amazing. And one of the things that is so amazing about the layout, no, it truly is. I mean, I'm an environmentalist, but I never thought of it as you owe it to the tree to make as good a product as you can. And I think you just up the standard for my own work.
Well, that's really sweet of you to say, but no, honestly, don't one thing that, I mean, I try and do is, the paper that we use for the magazine is carbon neutral. It's becoming increasingly hard to justify like making anything physical nowadays, I really want, if we're going to do this, to make it in the most ethical way possible and make it, I think the main thing for me is that I want this to be a positive thing. There's so much negativity in the world, and especially in the games industry, can be so caustic. Like, I want to create something that is uncompromisingly optimistic, and that will make you feel good to read it, know that you're supporting something that is good, and just give you a clear conscience mostly when you read it. Like, I'm trying hard not to use sort of plastics and stuff in the magazine as much as possible, for that reason. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, the environment's an important thing, and we could get sidetracked into talking about that for ages. But yeah, there's no reason to, and I'm only doing that again because I can afford to, because the Kickstarter allows me to sort of use these techniques and to take the time to do that. But I would not feel, that necessarily reflects on the work of anyone else, or if anyone isn't doing that they should be ashamed at all. That is not at all my intention.
One more thing about the layout that I want to comment on is how impressive it is that even though every page is a work of art, it doesn't impede the readability. I've seen magazines where you flip every page and you don't know where to start looking, or what direction your eye is supposed to go in, or where one thing connects to the other. They're trying to be diverse and varied, but it just ends up being confusing. And somehow that's a pitfall you've avoided. You make these unique pages, and yet still a very readable magazine.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's really nice of you. I think because I knew that every page was going to be illustrated, and because I knew that, there were going to be a lot of changes in layout, I was really clear that you'd always have a sort of anchor point for each page. The idea, at least, is that, when you flick through this thing, no matter how, erratic or, what's the right word? I don't know. No matter how different each page was, that you would always be able to have a comfortable time reading it. Right, the text would always have a certain degree of space around it, that you'd always, be able to find your place on the page. I think it's not that different from a lot of sort of game design principles. It's about conveying information to, the audience, whether that's the player or the reader, in the clearest and most concise way possible. So I'm really glad that you said that, Ken. That's really sweet of you.
I call it like I see it. That's all.
Thanks.
Let's talk about your Kickstarter for a bit. You've put a lot of work into your magazines. How much work went into the magazine before you even launched the Kickstarter? Like, did you already have writers lined up, articles written, etc.?
I've been trying to get this Kickstarter off the ground since I properly started working on it in March of this year. So it's December now. I mean, we launched in November, so good 9 months or something. And really, I was emailing people before then, back in January. So yeah, it's been a lot of work. It's a natural consequence of working on something more or less on your own. I'm really, really lucky in that one of the people who helps me on the magazine is Darren Wall. Darren is one of the he's the founder of a video game publishing company. Well, not video game publishing, video game book publishing company called Read Only Memory. And he's made a lot of fantastic books like the Sega Mega Drive Genesis collected works, and he's just coming out now with a Dreamcast book. He creates these beautiful anthologies, and he helps me. But even with the two of us, and even with Darren's help, it does take it takes a lot of time to get something like this off the ground, to film and edit the Kickstarter video, to get people to commit, to sort of keep them committed over the months it takes to get other people to commit. It just is a long process. Yeah.
No, and that makes sense that you don't want to go on Kickstarter and ask people to fund a concept. You want to say, I have all this work done and we just need your help to get over the finish line. I think that's a formula for a successful Kickstarter.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think beyond that also, it's, you know, like a big thing I was worried about, Ken, with this one was that I kind of feared that if I was doing a Kickstarter again after the first one, it would seem somehow complacent or, you know, like that people wouldn't support it. So I really wanted to make every effort to show that we're doing this and it's an event and, you know, that there's a lot of care and love in this thing. You know, Kickstarter is amazing, but it's also, you know, it's quite a thing to ask strangers for money. And I don't do that lightly, you know, like I have to do it with, you know, every effort to be as, you know, to do it as well as possible and, you know, and do it in a way that's as agreeable as possible to the backers, you know, to the people who are kind enough to support.
Well, I would certainly not describe any of your work as complacent, and I don't think your backers would either. The first Kickstarter, as you mentioned earlier, received almost twice the amount of funding you asked for. You asked for £20,000. You got 39,000 exactly. This time, your initial ask was £37,000, and you've already exceeded that. You've already accrued more than the first Kickstarter did. So does that mean that, like last time, you ended up making a magazine that was twice as big as you expected? Is that your goal this time, to make a magazine that is exactly the right size?
No, I think like the magazine is already too big, to be honest. I think it's just a case of, you know, I was really lucky to get more money than the first time, like more money than we asked for the first time. But the end result of that is that, you know, we were using that money at a time when I didn't really know what the magazine was. You know, I was molding this thing out of clay. I didn't know what the dimensions were going to be. I don't know what the page count was going to be. I know those things now, which is why we asked for more money than we did the first time for this new Kickstarter, because I had an idea of what the page dimensions were, what the magazine actually was. This time, with the money that we've got extra, I mean, I'm probably going to be using it to just like invest in the magazine and invest in the company as much as possible. You know, there's so much stuff that needs doing, like websites and stuff. You know, updating the website, updating our, you know, our shopping system, making sure that like everyone is paid. It will mean that we can hire more illustrators and more writers this time. And ultimately, though, like all the money that is coming in is just going to be used to make more magazines. You know, we're going to print as many magazines as people ask for. So that's where the bulk of the cash is going to go. But yeah.
Do you have stretch goals outlined? Like if you earn this much more than your goal, you will do this other thing?
Not really, no. And I think, you know, I've already experienced project bloat with issue 1, and we didn't have any stretch goals then either. I think ultimately, like, I'm only asking for enough money to do the thing that I want to do. Anything else on top of that is an immense gift, and I'm so grateful for it. But I just worry that, you know, you see it in game Kickstarters all the time when people have loads of stretch goals and then the project becomes like this uncontrollable behemoth that they can't get a handle on. And I just kind of want to avoid that as much as I can, which is, yeah, so hence no stretch goals at the moment, at least.
Other than the funding goals, what did you learn from the first Kickstarter going into your second one?
Ooh, God, I don't know. I think the thing I've learned is that things go wrong. Things go wrong. Yeah, really wrong. I remember, you know, when I used to do this thing on my own, I was only accountable to myself. And I think that's why you see in a lot of indie game projects, they're made by one-people teams. I think maybe a lot of that is to do with the degree to which we kind of like the auteur story. You know, we like talking about, oh, this is a Hideo Kojima game, or, you know, Toby Fox, this incredible guy, made this game like on his own. We love narratives like that, but I think also there's a degree to which when you're working with people, you know, you have to rely on other people as well. Being accountable only to yourself is great. But, you know, a classic example, right, is with the printing. We were originally going to print with a company in Croatia, and we did print with them and they were great. And then we tried to do a reprint but they declared bankruptcy halfway through the printing. And, I'd already paid, quite a large sum of money to get a new batch of magazines made. I mean, relatively in the grand scheme of things, like it's not a huge amount of money for most companies, but for a small startup thing, like a profound waste of time, it was huge. And that's something that you can't prepare for. You can't do anything for, there's no way of really like being able to futuristically see ahead and, see that stuff coming. You just become more cautious and, you become better at rolling with punches. And I think that's true for any kind of creative endeavor, whether it's game dev, whether it's, a magazine, whether it's filmmaking. Is just things will happen outside of your control. And I'm very prepared for that to all happen again and more for issue 2. But that's actually really positive, I think. I feel really like relaxed about it in a way, knowing that these things can happen. And also knowing that we were able to get something made despite all of that stuff going wrong. It's a good feeling.
It gives you a confidence to know that you can overcome these obstacles because you have before, and hopefully they won't happen a second time. But if they do, you have demonstrated to yourself that it's not a game stopper.
Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's just you just gotta take it on the chin and keep going. And eventually, like if you just keep plucking away at something, it will. It'll eventually bear fruit. I don't know what's a good expression for this.
So the Kickstarter says that the final product will be delivered at the end of 2020. And that is based on your experience that the last project was supposed to take 6 months and instead it took 18.
Yeah.
Assuming no obstacles happen, then we will be reading this magazine a year from this podcast. Is that right?
I hope so. I mean, I'm looking for wood to touch around me, but yeah, I mean, that's the hope. I really, I really want to create something that is special and that feels exciting. My dream is for one day for like this magazine to become a part of the whole gaming calendar in general, in the same way people look forward to E3. I want people to look forward to, new Profound Waste of Time's coming out. That's really cool. I mean, I know that's like a ridiculous thing almost to want, but I think the only step really to getting that is just make something good and just keep making something good. So we'll take the time that we need, but yeah, gunning for next Christmas. Yeah, that's the aim. That's the wish. Hopefully I can be on your show in a year's time and we can see how it went.
I love that. One difference between APWOT and E3, of course, is that E3 is annual and it has deadlines, whereas APWOT, I don't know that I can really describe it as a periodical because I don't know what the frequency is, like once every 3 years.
I don't know what the frequency is either. I think like the aim is to get it to the point where it's annual, like I was burnt out after the first one. I couldn't believe that that it was actually real and it was happening. I needed some time off. I think now like the aim is to get to the point slowly but surely is, just building up the infrastructure to the point where we can at least make this biannual, if not annual, It's just one of the things where good things take time, and I want to make good things. I don't want to create something that's expendable. I never want anyone to throw their copy of the magazine away. I want it to be something that they keep. It's meant to be something that you will still be able to read in 10 years' time and still be able to get something good from it and it will still feel relevant. That's just not something that I can do on like a monthly scale, unless I get a huge amount of money and people are throwing cash at me and I'm able to hire loads of staff and, hire an office and stuff. But right now, as a project that I do in my bedroom, this is the way it's got to be, sadly. But one day, maybe it will be an annual thing, hopefully.
Well, you did mention that you do need some rest in between the issues, and I assume that goes for the Kickstarter as well. The Kickstarter is currently scheduled to end on Thursday, December 19th, 2019 at 7 p.m. GMT. What are you going to do when the Kickstarter is over?
Probably just like, I don't know, I imagine like all the moisture will leave my body and I'll just become like a husk, like a raisin on the floor, and I'll just be in the fetal position crying. I don't know. I don't know. What? I guess. I mean, I'll probably be at work, so I don't know. It's really nicely timed, to be honest, because it will be Christmas, so I'll get a few days off to chill, and then I'm gonna just start working on this thing in earnest. That's the idea. But I don't know. I think it's. I honestly. It's weird hearing you even hearing someone even mention that this Kickstarter will be over, because it's been such a focus in my life for so long. I don't even know. I haven't really thought about what comes after, to be honest.
Yeah, it can be a full-time job, and to suddenly look at the horizon, see a day when you're not doing this can be incomprehensible because it's so all-consuming in the meantime.
Yeah, you know what I think? I'll do? I think I'll probably put my head in my hands and shudder when I realize, oh no, I've got to do it all again. I've got to make the actual magazine now. I mean, I'll grieve about that for a bit, and then once I've cried my eyes out, I'll actually make the thing.
Well, at least you already have a good foundation. You've done so much work. You have a great staff to work with. There's one more thing I want to ask you about before we go, and this is something that you gave me permission to ask, which is,
sure,
you have so many amazing accomplishments, and you have not been slowed down in the slightest, it seems, by having dyslexia. How does that manifest itself in your life?
Ooh, well, I mean, yeah, I've never really made it's not something that I've ever really I don't really talk about it. It's not really a huge deal in my life, but I do have very severe dyslexia, and I mean, it's quite hard when you're in the magazine business with something like that, because you're dealing with text all the time. I mean, for me, dyslexia kind of it manifests itself in the way that I get overwhelmed by information quite easily. If I have a long spreadsheet or a big form or something, the words get jumbled together, and I can, misinterpret information or misread stuff. It happens all the time, even when I'm not aware that I'm doing it, which is the weird thing. So often I'll say someone's name incorrectly, even though I know their name, and I know it in my mind, and I'm saying it in my mind, and yet the words that are coming out of my mouth are different. With the magazine, it just means that I miss typos and stuff. But thankfully, I have a proofreader, and we hire proofreaders, professional proofreaders, to counterbalance that. I don't know. I think it's one of those things that it definitely makes me sort of it puts me off trying certain very heavy mathematically heavy projects. I dabble a bit with game development now, but I didn't try for so long because I just assumed that the degree of maths involved and all of that would just be too it would be I just wouldn't be good at it. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I guess the main thing, if you were going to cut right to the chase, was that it kind of makes you second guess yourself a lot. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? You kind of, I'm consistently unsure if I've got something right, because I can read something 12 times and still miss a typo in there. But to be honest, I think that's quite healthy in a way. I don't think, I think there's something about people who are super confident and super self-assured, which, maybe that's just the way I am. Maybe the way I am is that I'm just meant to be nervous, and maybe that's the way, maybe that awkwardness about my own work is what makes me decent at what I'm doing. Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. I can totally imagine somebody who makes mistakes but isn't aware of it, doesn't seek feedback, and isn't receptive to it when it's offered. I think of the two, I would much rather be in your position.
Yeah, I mean, as far as things that people can have, it's very in terms of the lottery of life, the fact that that's what I ended up with is basically that, that's a gold star ticket. You know what I mean? I'm so lucky that, that's one of the few things that, I have handicapping me in any way. So yeah, it's good in that it makes me constantly ask for help. And I think that's nothing but healthy. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very insightful. I appreciate it.
Well, I don't know. I'm happy. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not like. I'm sure you have people on who have much worse going on, but I appreciate you asking about it. It's kind of you.
Sure. And I'm sure we have listeners who can empathize with your situation and hopefully learn from it.
Yeah, here's hoping, huh? Here's hoping.
So I appreciate you giving me so much of your time because you are very busy with the Kickstarter. Please remind our listeners where they can find both APWOT and the crowdfunding campaign.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so if you want to back the magazine, you can just type in A Profound Waste of Time issue 2 into Kickstarter, and it should come up. But the best way to find us is just at APWOT Mag on Instagram and Twitter. So it's at and then APWOT and then mag. So at APWOT Mag, and you can find us on all the social media stuff. And yeah, just give us a follow or back the campaign if you want. We would really appreciate the support.
Fantastic. And I have backed the campaign, as I mentioned, and then the campaign ends next week at the time of this airing. That's Thursday, December 9th, 2019. So if you want to check it out, please do so. Cass, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really, honestly, I feel that I've been rambling too much, and I'm sure your listeners are sick of hearing me. But it was really nice to be here. So thanks.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.
Just so your viewers know, I've got a cup of tea and a teapot next to me, and they might hear me slurping and stuff during this podcast, and that might be unpleasant. But I refuse to be shamed into not drinking because I'm tired right now. So I'm just gonna let's do a sound test. Wait, you can let me know. Can you hear this? How was that?
Hear what?
Exactly. Brilliant.
Didn't hear a thing.
Cool.
Nope.
Brilliant. That's perfect. Oh, good to know.
The tea is silent.
Yeah, exactly.